Hey, it's Captain Matt. Today we're going to talk about the truth about unsinkable boats. You hear it all the time, especially people at the coast talking center consoles. I'm your host, Captain Matt, author of the book Boat Buyer's Secret Weapon, host of the channel, and also the creator of the Boater Boot Camp for brand new boaters. Teach them what they don't know about this new world of boating. So let's start with the definition. So there's real definitions and then there's marketing definitions. So Boston Whaler started it with the unsinkable boat way back. The first term is positive flotation. Positive flotation is actually an unsinkable boat. If you look, this boat is not sinking. They are in deep water, but that positive flotation just allows it to stay above and not go to the bottom. So that's the official term. Positive flotation is truly unsinkable. Not the safest, but that is the first one. The next is a modified level flotation. Now, this is a U.S. Coast Guard requirement for monohull boats under 20 feet with more than 2 horsepower, okay? And what that means is that the boat is going to sit relatively level. Now, that definition is kind of squishy, but relatively level when swamped, which means about 10 inches of freeboard above the water line. So you fill the boat until it's swamped, and then it still needs to be floating relatively level about 10 inches above the gunnel, so going over the edge, okay? That's modified level flotation, and that's a requirement for all monohull boats. So your V-hulls, doesn't count for catamarans, doesn't count for pontoons. There's also level flotation, which is unsinkable, or positive flotation is how some marketing people will use it. But level flotation means that the boat can be in the water, it can be swamped, and have additional weight on it. And again, it's going to float level and it's not going to capsize. Remember those first couple pictures, that is still floating, still hasn't sunk, but it's not level. This, much more, you can see that boat's actually pulled the plug on that one, but that's going to give you a safer experience on the water, because no matter what happens, that boat is going to stay in that positive flotation position. Now, if a huge wave comes along, maybe not. It's not self-righting, but as long as you don't have that force that's going to flip you over, the flotation is going to be level. And that, to me, is what the unsinkable message, marketing message, truly is. Okay. Now, when it comes to these designations, the U.S. Coast Guard actually gives them the procedures and the specs, but the manufacturers actually test their boats themselves. So that's the way the process works in manufacturing of the boats. Although you can have the Coast Guard do it, from what I understand, in their own testing facilities, but it's a series of placing weights throughout the boat based on what the manufacturer says is the capacity. You know, those little black and yellow capacity plates? That's manufacturer driven based on formulas, and they can go below that, and then they just have to prove that will work under those conditions, okay? So, couple of things to know. The way they're achieving this is by using foam in the building process, okay? Now, there's a couple of different ways to do foam. The first is like Boston Whaler and Edgewater do, which is called a foam shot, where they put two different fluids into the hull. They mix together, they catalyze, and they start raising, and they fill in the gaps. And that's a polyurethane foam. There's also a polystyrene foam. I don't know what the difference is. I just know that there's 2 different kind of foams. And then there's the foam method where you actually cut the foam and you place it in the hull construction between the hull and the deck, or in the case of Edgewater, the hull, then the liner, and then the deck on top of that is how they do it. And they're achieving that same level flotation, that same requirement that the U.S. Coast Guard has for boats under 20 feet. And then over 20 feet, it's optional. And it's going to vary not just by manufacturer, but sometimes it may vary by model. So it's a question that you may want to ask. And then the least expensive way is to use kind of a foam cell that you just place in there in different places, where it's not going to be really filling all of the voids with foam. Like you can see the Edgewater down at the bottom, how they're sort of custom cutting it to fit the contours, and it's really a pretty snug fit. Other manufacturers will just cut blocks and place them in there strategically, and it may not be as solid, okay? Now, because it's foam, there's a couple of things that you need to know. This is sort of a warning for all boat owners, but especially the ones that are most concerned about this, is when you have these foam pieces, they're mostly closed cell, which means that they're not going to allow water in. The problem is when you put a screw in, and hopefully a stainless steel screw, when you put a screw through that styrofoam, now you're breaking that closed cell and you're opening up to water intrusion. So what's really important with these boats is that if you have a screw hole through, maybe your transducer, maybe you mounted something on the exterior, maybe it's a through hull fitting, especially if it's below the waterline, you need to inspect and then reseal all of those exterior holes every year so that you don't have water coming in. And you may have heard the horror stories of some of the older boats that get waterlogged. You know, they've sucked in so much water and now it's inside that foam and it's nearly impossible to get out without some sort of a vacuum process or a drying process that, you know, boats have definitely gone through, but is expensive, time consuming, and a pain. So the way to avoid that is to make sure anywhere there's something through the gel coat, now it could be inside the boat or outside the boat, you'll go sure and make some silicone, some sort of a sealant, and reseal that on a regular basis. Now, depending on your environment, if you're down in South Florida, if you're up north, that sealant may last longer than others. But if you inspect it every year and then you reseal, freshwater, saltwater, doesn't matter, that's going to keep you from having that issue of water intrusion getting in, causing delamination on your fiberglass and gel coat, and from waterlogging that foam. And if you have experience with foam construction, your foam being waterlogged and how you dealt with it, put that down in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. And your thoughts on the Unsinkable marketing message and the floating level versus just the modified level floating, which is the requirement, and what you think, should it be for larger boats as well? Would love to hear your comments. If you're thinking of buying a boat, you can get the Boat Buyer's Toolkit totally free. It'll help you through the process step by step. There's also some other tools that you'll be offered. If you grab that and the cost of ownership calculator, which is super valuable, get that at Boat Buyer's Toolkit. And remember, life truly is better on a boat.